Hey, my friends, it's Kelly Reeves, and welcome to the Confidence Academy. Hey, everyone, welcome to the Confidence Academy. I am your host, Kelly Reeves. Thank you so much for being here today because today's episode is not one you're going to want to miss. So I am so happy you're here because if you've ever dealt with fears and anxieties, and I just looked this up real quick before I started recording, an estimated of over 40 million Americans suffer from some sort of anxiety disorder. So maybe you don't suffer from anxieties, but maybe you suffer from fears. So that could be fear, like a money fear, job loss, business loss, fear about your kids, about your future, about your health. We all have some sort of fears. There's no one on this planet who is 100% fearless. So if you suffer from fears or you know someone who does, please share this episode because they're going to get so much out of this and you are doing them a huge favor. And if someone shared this episode with you, thank them because that means they care about you, they care about your well-being and your happiness, and they know that maybe you struggle with this, or maybe you've just said, hey, I'm afraid of blank, and they thought you needed to hear this. So thank them because today's episode is so exciting. I have such a fantastic guest. His name is Matt Cotty. He is a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds. And after years of battling his own anxiety and his own OCD, Matt developed the AAA response, which is a practical, solution-focused approach to recovery and healing that has now helped thousands of people across the world. His mission is simple: to guide people away and out of fear and anxiety and towards clarity, courage, and trust. You're not going to want to miss this episode, and stick around until the end because we have a special gift for you. So you're not going to want to miss this episode. You're going to want to stick around until the end. And please help me welcome Matt Cotty to the Confidence Academy. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining me. And, we were kind of just talking about my anxiety, your anxiety before we started recording. And, I've been very open on my social media and to my friends about the diagnosis of anxiety and the treatment. Yeah. And so there's so many mysteries and unknowns about anxiety and what it is and what it isn't and what it means. And, I think right now, especially, everyone's nervous system is probably in fight, flight, or freeze response with an uncertain economy, recent social unrest in LA. I'm in California, so
me too.
Yeah. We're all feeling that. So for the person who is listening or watching, if they're on YouTube or on iTunes, let's talk to them about what anxiety is and what anxiety isn't, kind of bust some myths and misunderstandings about it. And then, we'll go into, the anxiety as a loop and what you do and how you serve people and, what this whole anxiety thing means, because for a lot of people, they don't really understand it.
Yeah, no, great. And just to quickly introduce myself. So my name is Matt Cotty, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And so I run the company Restored Minds, and I specialize in helping people with OCD and anxiety, and really that are kind of stuck in loops in that spectrum. And I think, like you said, starting off with definitions is so important because one of the big, I guess, foundations of miscommunication is presuppositions, right? Of like assuming that I understand something the way that you understand it, and that we're talking about the same thing when we can be talking about two totally different things. So let's kind of start with, I guess just some overarching definitions. So anxiety is the feeling and presence of fear, right? But it's associated towards the future. Right. So we have real danger that we experience in life, right? Like there are such things like if I'm crossing the road, for instance, right? it's important to understand that that's dangerous, right? Like there's a car that could hit me and harm me, right? And so it's important to understand that danger is real in life. Okay, I mean that that I think that goes without saying that there are people that given their own energy state and all that, could be dangerous, right? So, but danger is present. It's happening right now. When I'm crossing a street, and it's happening right now, and my nervous system is responding to that right now. So that fight or flight or freeze, all of that response is going to be happening in the moment. Okay. And anxiety is when we have fear that projects itself onto a futuristic idea or outcome, right? Um, so, great example would be someone who has fear over the future of the economy, right? Or
Right.
the future of currency in the United States, or a plethora of other things, right? Is my spouse gonna leave me? Am I gonna get a
Mhm.
disease one day? Uh, you know, so basically it's fear, and then the mind projects it onto a futuristic outcome, right?
Right.
And if you had to really say it bluntly, like anxiety is faith in the unwanted,
Mm.
right?
Oh, interesting. I love that.
It's like because we all are people of faith, and it's either you're putting your attention and focus on the wanted or the unwanted. When we're
Right.
caught in fear loops, we're focused on the unwanted, right? And we're feeling emotion in response to that idea and then perpetuating it, right? Um, so when it comes to the idea of stress, and this is actually, like I think kind of the major thing here, stress, anxiety, all of that. I don't see it as an external thing, right? I don't
Right.
work at it from an external place. I don't believe that something causes anxiety outside of someone,
Hmm.
right? Because, like I've worked with, especially when I was part of a, private practice, and obviously I work with a lot of clients. And so like someone who, let's say that doorknob behind me, someone tells me, Matt, that doorknob makes me anxious because I'm afraid if I touch it that I'm going to get germs or a disease or, what
Mm-hmm.
have you, right? The reality is the doorknob doesn't make someone anxious, because if it
Right.
did, it would be cause and effect. Everyone would get anxious from it,
Right.
right? And what anxiety really is it builds from underlying belief systems that we have, underlying identity systems, and then the emotion of fear and our emotion of guilt and all of our lower emotions really, the more we resist them, we kind of store them in our system, right? So we have this kind of big reservoir. And as they come up, the mind creates justification for the presence of the emotion, right?
Hmm.
So if I'm feeling afraid right now and there's nothing dangerous happening, well, my mind's going to be like, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And so you have this mind, you have the emotions, you have your consciousness,
Hmm.
and what anxiety is really the feeling of fear that's projected onto a futuristic outcome. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said that you personally struggled
Yeah.
with OCD and anxiety. So
Mhm.
tell us a bit about like your story, like your journey of your suffering with it, and I know we talked earlier about the word suffering. So forgive me if
Yeah.
I just continue to use it out of
Yeah. Yeah.
habit.
No.
But
No.
your journey to having anxiety and maybe battling it or whatever, and to where you kind of start now mastering it and teaching other people how to conquer it.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, I can kind of trace back, and so again, like people that deal with a lot of fear, right?
Mhm.
And so I'll say fear because we're kind of encompassing what like anxiety is the physiological experience that one's having, right?
Mhm.
Like the mind's racing, right? They
Right.
feel uncomfortable, tightness in the chest, right? Shorter, like these this feelings and sensations.
Right.
We're really talking about like kind of the whole emotional field of fear, right? And this can manifest as a spectrum of experience, right? So you can have a little fear before a nice first date or a
Mhm.
presentation to phobias to social anxiety to OCD to panic attacks to, PTSD to really high
Hmm.
experiences like derealization and depersonalization. And I really see anxiety and fear as a spectrum of an experience.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
That it's not is like, yes, there may be people that have one thing, but usually when someone's in a state of fear, they can bounce in between these kind of experiences, right? Like someone can have a really significant event and then have a panic attack and then have a bunch of social anxiety because they have a panic attack. You know what I mean? Become
Hmm.
avoidant, agoraphobic, all of that. So it kind of just is really understanding it from like there's like an energy field or emotional field that you're in.
Hmm.
So for me, um, my earliest experience with anxiety was probably 10, right, give or take, is when I had my first like kind of like spiral. Things got really bad for me, from being stuck in this loop when I had my first semester of college, right, and just really like just spiraled. And from it kind of started off, I started having all these like intrusive thoughts randomly, and then I would have like panic attacks, and then I don't want to be around people. And the interesting thing about anxiety, kind of the paradox, if you will, is the more you try not to feel something or not to have a certain experience, it creates like a pressure cooker, and
Yeah.
more of that experience exacerbates,
Yeah. It's like,
right?
don't think about that thing. Don't think
Yeah,
about that thing. Like, okay, I'm thinking
yeah.
about that thing.
Exactly. And there was like a whole study of it in the 80s. So a guy, a social psychologist named Dr. Daniel Wegner, wrote a book called White Bears and Other Unwanted Thoughts. And he did this study where he would have people get in a room and he'd be like, okay, for the next 10 minutes, don't think of a white bear. Right.
Yeah.
And they had to like tally every time. And the more he told them not to think about it, the more they thought about it,
Right.
had dreams about white bears, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that's interesting is when we understand so for my story specifically, I just spiraled in fear.
Hmm.
And I lived that way for probably 4 years before I finally like learned like what was going on. Right. So one of my fears, for instance, was like, oh, this fear of like, what if I got possessed one day? Right. And that was like a
Like by the devil.
yeah, or by a
Yeah.
demon or something, and so it was like I saw it in a movie, but it was it was the thing was is that there had been multiple fears, but fear, like I said, can latch on to anything
Right.
because there's nothing outside that causes fear. So really it was my underlying belief systems that were really going on of like I can't trust the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have to control everything. I have to be thinking about things and worrying about things and all this. So this pattern, right, really kind of got this momentum and really got me stuck in this kind of fear, emotional state, if you will, as kind of my baseline. And then that will latch on to different ideas, right? So we
Hmm.
project our fear onto an idea and then believe that that's the cause of it. Right. So we being the projector and the projection being the idea or the futuristic unwanted thing, what most people do when they are trying to handle any like OCD, anxiety, or phobias or whatever, is they try to handle the projection, right? They try to handle the thing that they think is the cause of the fear. And one of the reasons that we project fears onto certain topics or ideas is because we don't really want to confront the idea that fear is here,
Right.
right? We don't want to really look at ourselves and be like, look, I'm full of fear right now,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, that's the whole word, fearful, right? I'm literally full of this like
Hmm.
fear emotion. And that's where I'm operating from. And then we justify, our actions and controlling behaviors because really all that is actually for is us to make us feel a certain way, right? Like why we do anything is all about our own feeling state.
Hmm.
So when you are projecting your emotions outside of yourself as like this caused this and this caused this and oh, I'm afraid of this topic, what you're really doing is escaping yourself and then trying to control that so that you feel okay,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
So when so I went on this journey of I'm not gonna live like this. Like I was like I'm
Right.
not gonna like live in these loops and being anxious all the time. Like I want a different life for myself than that. And so I went on this healing journey, and that healing journey spanned across many years because ultimately it was a trial and error kind of. I didn't know what I was doing, like learning a lot of things, and through the culmination of that process, um, you know, really begin to understand that what the key to getting yourself out of certain states and into higher states of being, really understanding that kind of levels of consciousness or levels of energy, if you will, that people like Dr. David Hawkins talked about. More current would be someone like Frederick Dotson, but it traces back, through Lester Levinson and all, but this idea of this emotional scale, really understanding that there's different planes of existence that we can have as humans.
Right.
Right. And so we can be in the real low fields of shame and guilt, right? Apathy and depression. And then again, fear and anger, right? And then even pride. And then you get into these higher states, though, of things like courage and neutrality and acceptance and peace and love. And the thing is that we all have this state that we are bringing into the world, right? And that state is not that you're in one emotion, but it's kind of what it really is like, what's your average, right? Like, what state are you in? What's your average? Like, so most of us, when we feel anger, instead of acknowledging that we feel anger, we project it as someone else is causing my anger, right? And so I need to get rid of that person, or I need to address that person. And so when the first step to really recovering was this idea that, like, look, this is going on in here. I need to look at myself, right? And so then it was learning how to really confront and feel through emotion, release emotion, and then look at the underlying beliefs that I had been maintaining to that point, my overall perspective, like the identity structures. And so there's many layers to the quote unquote healing of it, but I don't really know that I would necessarily call it like when you're stuck in this perpetual loop of fear. And that generally has four main components, right? You have the initial thought, or you have the belief, you have the feelings, you have the intrusive thoughts that are going with it. And then you have the behaviors you're engaging in that are giving you that instant relief. What happens is the loop forms. Right. And so, to give a really simple example, going back to that doorknob, right? Someone who's already kind of in this, like, again, untrustworthy, like not untrustworthy, untrustingness, a distrusting state is what I'm really trying to say. Like, the world's dangerous. They're going to be hyper vigilant because their nervous system's already in this state of, I'm in danger. Right. And you learn that early on from attachment to your caregivers, to the stories that they had, right? All of this stuff goes into it. Okay. And I think that we finally reach a point where we're experiencing a lot of emotion and we just assume it's the problem, but realizing that it's been like built up over time. But someone sees the doorknob and they hear, oh, well, what if I got AIDS from touching the doorknob? Or what if there was blood on it I didn't know and I get AIDS? And then they feel a bunch of fear come up, right? And then they avoid touching the doorknob, or they wash their hands after they touched it, and that gives them the relief. Well, they're falsely conditioning themselves to believe that doorknob was the cause of fear, and now I need to protect myself against doorknobs, right? And germs.
Yeah, I think that, like, well, we all went through that with COVID. It's like, oh, you look at somebody funny, you're going to get COVID.
Yeah, and I see many people now still dealing with lingering effects of reinforcing. Like, there was that whole case that just came out of the parents that kept their kids in the house for 4 years or whatever it was, right? And they got removed by child service because they were protecting them, right? And it's like, and this is where, when we're in a state of fear, we're not able to truly evaluate danger because everything's going to look dangerous in that lens of fear. Right. And what you have to realize is that we reinforce our states and we reinforce our beliefs, and we end up staying in certain states. Right. And that's really what I believe anxiety disorders are, is not this external thing happening to somebody, but a state that a person is unknowingly or naively perpetuating.
Do you think that that it can eventually cause a deeper internal identity? So say you always have money fears, like every time you get a bill, or you freak out and you have heart palpitations and whatever, but then you start identifying as somebody with money problems, and anytime money issues come up, you're off to the races in your mind. And
because it becomes self-perpetuating, right? It's almost, and that's, so like, money is a great example. Money doesn't cause fear or joy. Money is a thing,
Right.
right?
It's a tool.
It's like that's all it is, a medium of exchange.
Right.
But this is why, and I work with a lot of people on this specific, quote unquote fear in general, because money, at the core of money fear is a belief in scarcity,
Hmm.
right? It's a belief that there's not enough,
Yeah.
right? And interestingly enough, it's like if you are in that state, you see that everywhere,
Hmm.
right? But if you're in an abundant state, you see abundance everywhere,
Right.
right? Like, it's, and this is what I mean about the really the consciousness of an individual is a reflection of their identities, their beliefs, their dominant feeling states, their convictions about reality, their perceptions, all of that. And we think that we're all seeing the world the same way, but we're all seeing it totally differently,
Right.
right? We're bringing our own consciousness into the world, and really we're just finding things that reflect our current consciousness to us, right? So someone who is in fear all the time goes into the world and they see danger everywhere, right?
Right.
Someone who is in anger state all the time, they find the jerks, or the people they don't like, they see them everywhere,
Right.
right? It's like, oh, you see what that person posted, like they will see things that you don't see,
It's
right?
like almost like like the retricular activating system. It's like you
Uh-huh.
almost
Yeah.
perpetuate it, and and you see it. And so because you see people who always seem to have problems, they're constantly like, oh, I have problem
Yeah.
after problem after problem.
Right.
And I always say, like, well, if you'd stop talking about all your problems, maybe you wouldn't have so many
Right.
of them.
Right. And, and
Like,
and even then, if it's like with a person like that, you want to look at, like, is there an underlying sense of guilt where I don't deserve to have good? Right. And they have
mhm.
to create problems because they have the belief that the only way that you succeed in life is through struggle.
Right,
Right. And if you have that belief that the only way I can be successful is through struggle, well, you're going to create struggle,
right.
right? Or you're going to find struggle, right?
Yeah,
It's kind of like, this is why, like, when it comes to anxiety is a very surface thing that people experience. But what causes anxiety, in my opinion, and my own experience of myself, and also like when it comes to healing, it's not just about, like, what most people go with about healing. They're like, I'm going to figure out what triggers me and avoid that,
hmm,
right? Well, the issue is all those emotions are still there, number one,
right,
right? And if you're avoiding something, you're also reinforcing the idea that it's dangerous.
right,
What transcending fear is about is not getting rid of fear, it's becoming an individual that can handle fear,
right,
right? It's becoming the version of yourself that has the courage to sit through an emotion, right? That
hmm,
doesn't allow the emotion to dictate your experience and existence and what you do.
right,
Most people, they live in dominantly in lower states of emotion, right? Anger, fear, guilt,
hmm,
shame, right? Desire, right? So they're just, they're, again, and this is where, when you really get this idea, the work becomes so obvious what you need to do, right?
right,
Most people, again, are trying to change their outer world to make this okay in here,
right,
right? So money is a great example. I'll feel safe when I have $3
hmm,
million in the bank.
hmm,
That person's never going to have $3 million in the bank. And even if they do, they're not going to feel safe because they already don't. And then the number's just going to change to something else.
right. Yeah, and so because I'm fascinated with this, like psycho-cybernetics is something that I
Yeah.
study, and and a
With
lot of this is kind of like,
Maxwell, what's his name that wrote it?
oh
Yeah.
God.
But anyways, I understand I know the book you're talking
Yeah.
about.
So, and it's similar concepts to like what Joe Dispenza teaches and Abraham Hicks teach, and
Uh-huh.
what you put out there is what you get back. But it's also, and I listened to your recent podcast about how recovery is a decision,
Mhm.
and it it's always, and you had talked about the person that was super overweight, and they lost a bunch of weight. You're like, well, how did you do it? They're like, well, I just decided to do
Yeah.
it. And I don't think people realize how, and maybe they're afraid of making a decision because they're afraid of change. So can we like
Yeah.
talk about that? Because I think a lot of people don't make the big changes in their life, like make the big weight losses or leave that job that sucks or leave that, mentally abusive relationship because they're so afraid of change that they'd rather stay in the comfort that they know.
Absolutely. And you see this, right? Because what change means is you have to become a different person.
Hmm.
You can't be the same person that created the problem and the same person that solved the problem,
Right.
right? Like if you were, so for money is a great example. If you are in debt up to your eyeballs,
Mm.
the same thinking and behaving and acting and all that stuff that created the debt, you can't get out of debt with that mindset, let alone can you build wealth with that mindset,
Right.
right? You're oftentimes where you are in life is really just reflecting to you like, okay, who you're being and what you're doing, right? And the state that you're operating from. So the thing about like Abraham Hicks and Joe Dispenza, right? They talk about shifting into high states a lot,
Hmm.
right? See, and like the while I totally agree with the idea of being in the state that you're talking about, what most people don't realize is their collective state is relatively low.
Right.
And it's usually unconscious, right? Most people don't walk around really knowing that they're afraid,
Right.
right? They're just like, of course, this is going on, this is going on, this is going like, of course I'm afraid. It's like, no, like the fear's there, right? And like you have to first take ownership. So when I say decision and I look at recovery as a decision, recovery is breaking out of this self-perpetuating loop,
Hmm.
right? And I use the word recovery, but even then I don't necessarily love it because it's like
Yeah.
I don't believe fear's a disease to begin
Right.
with, right? I think our society has pathologized normal experiences,
Right.
right? But when we resist emotion, we sustain it,
Right.
right? So Hawkins, who his work, I mean, he wrote I think 10 books. Um, his big first book was Power versus Force, and he has an amazing story, when it comes to his own healing and all that stuff. I loved his healing journey. But one of his my favorite book from him is Letting Go,
Hmm.
right? And he talks about in letting go from an emotional standpoint how look, most of us have this idea that it's okay for everyone else to feel emotions, but when it comes to us, we're really not,
Right.
right? Emotions are for the artists and the people that have time for them, but I don't,
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and I don't mean disrespect to
Yeah.
artists, but you get what I'm saying. It's like especially men, right? I mean,
Right.
and
Oh, yeah. You're
I'd
not
say,
allowed to have emotions.
yeah, it's like, yeah, it's just like yeah, we don't feel things, right? But no, but so he goes through how we have basic ways that we handle emotion. Suppress and repress being the main, right?
Hmm.
Like so suppress this to push down consciously, repress this to push down unconsciously. Like I just deny the existence of it,
Right.
right? Avoidance is obviously a huge thing we do in the
Hmm.
States, especially. And avoidance can take on so many different terms, right? I'm just going to be on my phone all day,
Right.
right? Like if you go, like, so where do you live? Can I ask you, like, city,
Oh, I'm in
part of
Central
California?
in Paso Robles,
Okay,
California.
so we're in Southern California. A couple months ago, took our kids to Disneyland, right? And it was fascinating to like just sit there and watch, like because it's like the moment people are in line, every single person is just looking at their phone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like the moment I stop, what happens is the discomfort starts coming up if you're really aware of it. And then we see how quickly we have to escape from it. Right. And this is where all these industries are made to help us avoid and escape our emotions, right? Alcohol,
Hmm.
tobacco, right? Marijuana, right? Is a
Hmm.
massive industry in California now. Right. And it's even called like medicine, right?
Right.
um like again your emotions a disease,
Right.
right? Like it's just medicine, quote unquote. And but obviously just entertainment in general, Netflix and people just pumping out content, right?
Hmm.
And so many of us, our avoidance is just busyness.
Right.
It's like, like I ask most of my people that I work with, I ask them a question like, if I put you in a room by yourself with nothing for 2 hours, like how would you do?
Lose their
Like, could
mind.
you actually like sit there
Yeah.
with yourself? And for the most part, people can't.
Hmm.
And it's not that we're a more anxious society or something like that now. I don't actually believe social media causes anxiety. I really because again, if it did, what I believe is we have these emotional reservoirs, and what we have now is so much stuff to distract ourselves that our reservoirs are getting so full
Hmm.
that what ends up happening is a panic attack out of nowhere,
Right.
right? Like our reservoir is just like,
Just
right?
blows up. Yeah.
And this is even with long COVID. What's interesting is they're showing, that doing emotional release work is helping people overcome long COVID,
Hmm.
right? And because what I actually think happens with COVID, with it hitting the nervous system, is that someone's nervous system, if it's already overloaded with emotion, right,
Right.
that naturally, like the activation of that, right, through the virus or whatever, it's really bringing up all this stuff to the surface. And so a suppression, repression, avoidance, and then expression. So, and then finally the idea of actually letting an emotion go. So expression is another way that people try to handle their emotion. And the issue with it being, and this drives from okay, Freud,
Louise
yeah,
Hay.
right, yeah, Freud, yeah. So
Oh.
Freud's basic idea was that suppression was the cause of neurosis and
Oh, okay.
logical problems. So the whole theory was, well, if we teach people to express their emotions,
Hmm.
that will alleviate it. But expression itself doesn't actually take away an emotion, right? It just kind of takes some steam off it. This is why people can talk about their fears to a therapist for years, or be angry at something. Like, how many have you ever known someone who's just been angry about something for 20 years, and you've talked to them about it for 20 years? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Well, I cut him off after a little. I'm like, you got
Yeah,
to
right.
fix
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good boundaries. That's good boundaries.
Like, go
But
talk to a therapist if you're so
yeah,
angry about something from 20 years ago.
but this is really interesting because expression, what it does is it puts their negative energy onto you,
Right.
right? They're offloading onto you to give it a break for themselves. What truly releasing an emotion is actually acknowledging the idea that it's here in me,
Hmm.
and that I'm responsible for myself and my emotions and my state and my consciousness. And if I have an emotion here, if I truly feel through the emotion in a non-resistant state, that emotion will surface and pass.
Hmm.
Like, I can actually feel through something,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And I think like when you say that, like I know people that they're always talking about their problems and I cut them off. I'm like, you can maybe have a short bit of time to talk about it, but then you're done because
Yeah.
yeah, it's projecting it. And I'm kind of, I guess, an empath too, where I start to feel people's pain and frustration and whatever. So I kind of set boundaries, and it's not that I don't want to be compassionate or empathetic, but at the same time, I'm like, well, and it's maybe selfish to say I've got my own problems.
Well, no, but you
Pick
have to
on
protect
yours.
you. Well, again, once you understand that your state is the most important thing, you really take it seriously and you protect it,
Hmm.
right? Like, I have X amount of energy, a certain amount, right, that I'm bringing into my day. And my wife and children are the priority. I have to give energy to myself. I have to do
Hmm.
stuff to take care of myself. And then I have clients and people that I work with, and my team and all this stuff. So I have to be very cautious and or conscientious, I should say, of what I'm doing with my energy. And if I'm
Right.
letting someone just offload their negativity on me,
Yeah.
it's like, that's not necessarily, that's what socially we're conditioned to, the idea that that's you being a good person,
Hmm.
right? But what you're doing is you're not self-respecting, right?
Right.
You're not respecting yourself. You need to say, wait, hold on. I'm allowing this person just to offload their negativity on me. And generally speaking, what will happen if you're a person that allows people to do that, people will tell you they like you
Right.
because they feel great around you, because you just go and you let them offload on you. And they don't realize the energetic parasitic relationship that's being taken place there,
Right.
right? And this is why, to be bad, quote unquote, right, and say, hey, no, I don't want to hear this.
Hmm.
You may feel like you're being a bad person, but you're actually like stepping into a level of self-respect. And you're saying, like, look, I protect myself,
Yeah.
right? So with fear, right, circling back to that, absolutely, when you're in a state, in a circle, in a loop of fear, it creates immense suffering in your life, right? But it's not fear itself, it's the fact that you're wanting to escape fear and you're actually keeping yourself in that state that then creates the disorder in your life.
Right.
Right. It's not that fear is a disorder, it's resisting it creates disorder.
Right. Now, is that so? You had talked about attachment theory. So, for those that are unfamiliar with it, so is this what attachment theory? Like you kind of get attached to your fears, and or
No. So attachment
oh,
theory is really just kind of like the idea that I'm spacing on the guy that founded it, or really, but there's four main attachments that we have as children,
mhm,
right? So attachment is so you have two basic needs, right? As humans, you have your ability to be authentic and be yourself, and then your ability to attach to your caregiver, because essentially your caregiver and parent is your first understanding and version of God, if you will,
right,
right? And so if you have a caregiver that says you can totally be yourself and your attachment is never threatened, you're going to feel safe being you. You're going to feel safe feeling emotion. You're going to feel
hmm,
safe experiencing things and making mistakes and all this stuff. But if you grow up in an environment that says you're not allowed to be angry, right? If you get angry, I close off attachment,
mm-mm,
right? You will always choose attachment over authenticity, right? And so Dr. Gabor Mate talks a lot about this in his book, When the Body Says No. Talks about this, like the formation of disease, really, is like especially like chronic disease like cancer and stuff.
right,
So it's a pretty interesting. But the basic two needs are, again, first attachment and then authenticity. And you always prioritize attachment because as kids, that's what you need to survive,
right,
right? And what attachment theory is really, so you have secure attachment, which means secure, I'm safe,
hmm,
right? I'm safely attached. Insecure, anxious, right? So I'm not fully secure and I feel anxious. And then there's insecure avoidant, right? And this is more people who take an avoidant, kind of personality to conflict. And then there's disorganized attachment where, and so when I worked in social services for several years, it's like you would see the disorganized attachment, right?
right,
There's no real rhyme or reason to like what's safe or not,
right,
right? Um, Oftentimes the foundation for pretty significant mental health struggles, right? Um, but insecure anxious is really what we're talking about here because again you feel fear, right? And so that whole idea is your narrative underneath the feelings is I'm not inherently safe, I'm not inherently provided for, I need to be a certain person, I need to be a certain way to be accepted, to be loved, to be cared for, to be, to have my needs met, right? I'm not inherently safe,
right,
I'm not inherently worthy. I have to prove, this, and this is where you'll get the overachievers that come in from this, right? Because they
hmm,
always need to show everyone how great they are because that the message that they're a great, awesome, amazing person wasn't just, it was conditional,
right,
right? And so like Gabor Mate has a great, or Dr. Gabor Mate, let me rephrase that, has a great like analogy where he was explaining once where it's like, so imagine that a mom grows up in a home where it's like an alcoholic dad and anger really was like triggering to her,
hmm,
right? And then she has a kid and the kid goes and grabs cookies at the cookie jar and before dinner and she says, you don't do that. And he lashes out in anger when he's 4.
right,
Right. And she goes, we don't get angry in this house because her own childhood stuff came
right,
up. And then that kid learns, okay, if I get angry, mom closes off attachment.
right,
Right. So
okay,
that kid learns if I feel anger, I need to bury that
right,
because that keeps my survival.
right. So there's
Right.
like an
And
epigenetics component to it that,
oh, a belief. The belief
yeah,
is everything in this,
right,
right? But the beliefs are not like people think. It's not that you were necessarily told like you're not safe,
right,
right? It could be a total misinterpretation that you had when you were 3,
right,
right? And this is why what recovering from anxiety disorders needs, yes, you first need to learn how to go through feelings in general.
hmm,
But really what we're looking to do is move into a new level of attachment of like I can trust, like I'm inherently safe, right? I'm inherently worthy, right? This is what a lot of people talk about that are talking about like being in higher energy states. Like those beliefs are very high, like high emotional states, right? Because if you didn't have to feel like you had to prove your worthiness to be on this earth, well, you could walk around with quite a sense of ease on your
Right.
shoulders,
Yeah.
right?
Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
nice?
Yeah. It's like, okay, like I don't have to justify my existence.
Yeah. And I think people like, and I know I'm guilty of it. Like, I don't, I don't ever want to feel too safe because then I'll start to think I'm getting complacent and I'm not prepared
Mm,
for something potentially because things happen every day. Like you get rear-ended or your internet goes down. I live way out in the country and
mm,
my internet goes out all the time.
mhm.
Or just some unplanned, unexpected thing happens, and if I'm not mentally and emotionally prepared for it, and I'm just all la di da skipping through the daisies, then I won't be able to handle it. Or that's my
So
belief.
this is a great example of how we hold on to fear,
Hmm.
right? May I reflect this to you? Is that
Yeah, go
okay?
ahead.
Yeah, okay. So this is a great example. So one of the reasons that fear stays around in people's life is because we believe that we need it to succeed and survive,
Hmm.
right? And so this is a great example. Like, I'm not going to allow myself to be too easygoing or like, because again, so what happens is you start to get into higher states, right? You
Hmm.
start to feel like peaceful and joyful and like, oh, this is really nice. And then
Yeah.
and then you get resistant to it, right? You're
Hmm.
like, wait a second, like this is not safe to be in those emotions, right?
Right.
And it's not that you necessarily are having this dialogue. It all happens like unconsciously almost,
Right.
right? And we believe that we need fear to do the right thing to survive to all this stuff, right? See, this is where I don't and again, it's different for everyone depending on like what your state of consciousness is, which
Right.
is like which is often about how much like work you've done on yourself, so to speak. Have you let go of these beliefs? Are you what's your dominant emotional state? All of that, because I don't, I don't believe inherently that fear itself is destructive,
Right.
right? I fundamentally believe if someone brings a lot of fear into money, even if they
Right.
get it, they'll lose it,
Right.
right? Like because they'll fear losing it, right?
Right.
All fear always focuses on what I don't want to happen,
Right.
right? And circle, I know I'm bouncing all over, so I hope I'm staying like relatively baseline, but like
Oh, you're being great.
Frederick Dotson talks about like the whole manifestation principles and talks about how that only really applies if you're in positive energy to begin with,
Right.
right? Like you focusing on what you want, if you're feeling that underlying fear, that's not creating it because really what the ideas of manifestation is about to begin with is your dominant frequency, right?
Right.
Which is primarily your emotional state.
Right.
Right. So someone with fear can visualize millions of dollars in their life all day, but if they feel scarcity and lack, and that's what they're really feeling all the time, that's ultimately what they're going to bring in their life.
Right.
Right. And this is where there's this balance, right? So some people will tell you, oh, only feel positive. The problem is that's telling you to suppress the negative.
Right.
Part of being human is understanding that all these emotions exist.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to say, like, where am I authentically? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, where am I? And I'm here. And being willing to confront and go through that emotion. For most of us, what we really need to get good at is feeling through our lower emotion much more than trying to get ourselves into higher emotion. By feeling through lower emotion, you naturally move up into higher states.
Yeah.
And so to go back to the question that you just had mentioned, which was,
Not
hold
being
on.
complacent.
Yeah, like the idea for me anyway, what I've learned in my own life is that I don't need fear. I don't need to be afraid to do good. You
Right.
know,
Or to handle
like
things.
yeah, because it's like it's the whole idea of like, you know, do people really need to fear getting arrested or going to jail or eternal damnation to do good things, right? And
Right.
it really comes back down to the state they're in, right? And this is why it's not necessarily, this isn't like a universal statement for everyone, but it's like if you're in a loving state,
Hmm.
like like when I'm with my kids, I don't need to fear something bad to not to like just so that I give them dinner.
Right.
Like I provide for them because I love them.
Right.
Right. It comes out of that state.
But what about say people like that fear for their kids? Like I'm afraid my like yeah, I guess the people with the
Yeah.
kids with COVID, like I was afraid to let them go out for 4 years and now child family services came and got them. Like I'm afraid when my kid leaves for school, or like when my niece, she went away to college in Florida. And there was that fear, like, oh my gosh, her first time away from home. And my
Yeah.
sister had all these fears. And Emily, my niece, was like, well, I'm going away to college. She was
Mhm.
excited.
Yeah.
So, how
So
do people, I
yeah.
guess,
So I think it comes back down to really understanding fear is within me.
right,
That's where it exists. And
right,
it's not about like, so with COVID, like I'll be very transparent about how I went about it. Like my wife and I from the jump, I made a podcast about it, like in the mid outbreak in 2020 or whatever it was, where I said from the jump on that podcast, I was like, fear is the real pandemic that's going on
no,
here.
100, I agree.
Right.
That was my attitude too.
And like we just had our daughter, our first child. And my narrative from the jump was like, I am not going to teach my daughter that this world is something to fear.
Right.
Right. So if we had to wear a mask somewhere to get in somewhere, okay, like we would put it on, but like we still traveled the whole time.
Hmm.
Right. And even for myself, right? Like myself, this was my narrative with myself. I was like, I'm not going to fear a virus.
Yeah.
Like I am not walking into this world and saying I'm afraid of this virus that I can't see, and that's going to dictate my choices and behaviors. And you know
Right.
what? I got the virus 3 times, right? Okay. But I was like, my body is going to be so strong, and I'm gonna cultivate the energy of health and wellness, and it's gonna do exactly what it knows to do.
Yeah.
I trust my body to do that.
Yeah.
Part of healing comes back down to trust too, right? Like part of healing is like, so most people are trying to make themselves heal because they don't trust that their body will naturally do it.
Yeah.
And ironically, the controlling of it goes against the healing,
Yeah. Well,
right?
I had the same attitude about COVID too. Like I would wear a mask where it was required. But I'm like, look, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. We ate dirt, you know,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
like I trusted my immune system
yeah.
and so I was never like afraid to gather or, do things. I was just like, okay, but I'm with you that fear was spread. And I know this from when I owned my PR agency and worked with the media.
Yeah.
News spreads like a virus, fear spreads like a virus.
Right.
And I think kind of going back to what, I said at the very beginning is, people are in a constant fight or flight stage right now just because of all the things we're being exposed to today.
Well, and you're being manipulated,
Hmm.
right? And I think this is the point is that when you really take this within, you start taking. So the whole reason my program is called Taking Back Control, right? And when I work with people, it's not because it's like, oh, I am suppressing my emotions so well that I feel in control. What taking back control is saying, okay, like where am I placing my attention? Who am I giving my energy to?
Hmm.
Right. So like when you watched on I won't name any network specifically, but there were certain networks that had like death tolls every day.
Yeah.
Right. And you're watching it, you're like, okay, there's no way that they're accurately able to track these, like this tracker that just keeps going up every few seconds, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no way and then more importantly, it's like, what's your intentionality of showing that, right? Because
Right.
if you can get someone afraid through the beliefs that you're setting out, the
Mhm.
reality is people are very easy to control when they're afraid,
Yeah. So you lose your
right?
truth effect.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you understand that like my emotional state is something that is within my realm of control because I can choose what to believe. And if I'm feeling an emotion, I can choose to face it and release it. And then I can start to really prioritize what is my state and
Right.
realize that I'm going to bring that state into whatever I'm doing. So someone who's very, feeling fear all the time, and let's say their daughter goes off to college, like an example, right? It's not that the daughter going off to college is creating the fear. What it's doing is bringing up fear that's already there,
Right. Oh,
right? And it actually is an amazing opportunity for that person to look within and go, okay, I'm having a lot of fear right now, right? And it's like, where do I feel this? Right. And what story is going on underneath that that's really driving that? Right. And instead of like, and then instead of, oh, I need my daughter to change school so I feel better.
Right.
Right. It's like, oh, I can actually work within myself. Right. And this is where this is the thing. Most people don't really need to worry about the world too much. Like the world's fine. Right. It'll take care of itself. Right. Like
Yeah.
most people, their work is just right here and we're doing everything we can to avoid it. Right. When
Yeah.
you watch like, this stuff going on in LA, it has nothing to do with the surface conversations that everyone's saying it does. It has to do with just like the overall anger within individuals.
Right.
And when that collectiveness comes together, like again, it just takes over. It creates exactly what it's creating right now.
Right.
Right. And the same with fear. Like when I was watching people I reference this all the time. I was watching people buy hundreds of rolls of toilet paper.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
and they're like, well, no, this is and here's the interesting thing. When you're unwilling to really acknowledge your state and what's going on, you will justify it.
Yeah.
This is smart. It's practical,
Yeah.
right? This is why I'm afraid. Instead of actually just going to the idea of like, okay, I feel afraid.
Right.
Like, let me admit that to myself. What's the narrative with that? And actually, can I shift my state into a trusting state? Right. Well, you got to understand, Matt, there's people out in the other state that I don't know. Yeah. You know what? And there's amazing people there. And you know what? I'm going to set the intention of that my daughter's going to connect with and meet amazing people over there. She's going to find those people,
Yeah. So how do people, because like, I've done a ton of work on myself and my big outlet is journaling. So if there's something going on, I don't like to let things fester. So
Sure.
if I don't have any other outlet, and when we talk about outlets, but it's writing, and that usually kind of eases, like takes the edge off, or like
Yeah.
Louise Hay talks about, like screaming into a pillow.
Sure.
So how do people, because it's almost like people are afraid to admit that they're afraid.
Absolutely.
So how do people find
Because that's weak, right?
right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's actually a strength to be able to say, like,
Yeah.
I
I'm
have
being
this.
sarcastic for
Yeah,
those.
no, but it's true. But because we don't want to seem weak, and that's why when we talk about mental health issues, there's such a stigma, and people don't want to admit that they may have anxiety or pain because I might be fired from my job, or I might be
Right.
seen as somebody. So, how do people develop that awareness so they can say, oh, wait, time out. That fear is coming from here. Now let me start to unpack it and
Yeah.
then just get rid of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's why, so part of the reason that like restored minds exists, right, was to ultimately destigmatize a lot of these conversations,
Mhm.
right? Because it's like, why is it more socially appropriate if I'm feeling angry to go get just blacked out drunk,
Right.
right? Like why is it that like, alcohol sales went up, whatever it was, 800% or something like that during COVID. And that was like, that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. Or whatever. It's like when you look at what we've declared to be socially appropriate, and this is part of it too. It's like part of the fear is from a societal standpoint, we're okay with people having physical problems, but not mental,
Right.
right? Not mental or emotional, right? Because we have mystified it and it's all of a sudden something we don't understand when really it's pretty straightforward and obvious. It's like, yeah, you know what? Emotion is something that's normal.
Right.
Like it's not like none of this is ever taught in our school system. Like, why not?
Yeah.
Like why wouldn't you like go through like basic emotions with kids and
Right.
understanding what to do with them and all this stuff? And it's like, well, I mean, so what was the first question you asked? I'm just making sure I'm answering that correctly.
Oh, just like, how do people find the awareness?
Yeah. So like, what do you do and how do you find the awareness? The awareness begins when you stop looking outside of yourself to ease your suffering.
Hmm.
And I think everyone has I've come to the realization that everyone has their own journey to where they'll finally turn inward, right? And that you can't make someone do that, right?
Right.
A lot of entrepreneurs and really what we would call, externally successful people,
Mhm.
they hide in busyness and workaholism. And what
Mhm.
happens is no matter what job promotion they get, no matter what their salary is, whatever sports car they got, whatever home they got, however trophy model wife or husband they get, whatever it is, it only eases the suffering for just a little bit.
Right.
And then the next benchmark needs to be pursued. And you start to, I remember this. And I mean, I'm referencing myself, right?
Right.
By the way, for like, what finally turns the corner for people is to start saying, you know what, like maybe I don't need to control the world and I don't need to get the world a certain way for me to be okay. Like, what if I became okay
Right.
already? Like, what if
Yeah.
I just like worked here?
Why do we seek external thing? Like, why is it so hard to go internal? Like, why is it like, I'll be happy when, as
Well,
opposed
because
to,
what do we have to admit to ourselves?
right,
There's something amiss here.
right,
Instead, like, isn't it so much easier to say, oh my gosh, you know what the problem is? It's the person who was elected president or mayor or whatever it is, right?
right.
It's the person who, what the problem is? It's this country. You
It's
know what the
easy to
problem is? It's
blame.
those group of people,
Right.
right? It's the, it's so silly, right?
Yeah.
To think that like but it's so
Oh,
because then we don't have to change and
yeah.
change is scary. Right. So it's like, oh, you know what the problem is? It's, whatever big social, construct or mission is up next. It's like, you know, and this is the thing I always find so ironic. Like the people that are so passionate about these huge ideas, you look at their personal lives and they're in mass discord,
Right.
right? Often because it's like, what a better idea instead of looking at my life. That's why, like, I love Jordan Peterson's first chapter of his book, 12 Rules for Life. It's like, clean your room. He's
Right.
not necessarily talking about your bedroom. He's talking about like you, you
Right.
know, it's a metaphor for like, don't worry about changing the world if you can't keep your own room straight, you
Right.
know? And that's kind of the idea. Like most of us have enough work to keep ourselves occupied, like right here.
Yeah.
Right. And,
Yeah.
and we don't really need to like, but if we all did that, ironically, collectively, we would raise our consciousness as a society and humanity.
Yeah.
That's the interesting thing. Like, I actually believe individually, all of us have that very, very high energy state already there, right?
Right.
That peace, that love that transcends all understanding. Like I believe that's within us, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
even the Bible references the kingdom of God is within, right? And not to make it, I'm not trying to like
Yeah.
push a certain way here, but my point being, it's like, you know, I think if you look at it enough, you start to realize like the process just doesn't work if you try to change the outside to be okay inside.
Yeah.
And there's enough people that will tell you that. There's enough rock stars that have gone and done all the drugs and had all the orgies and all the other stuff and whatever they did, right? And they're like, it's meaningless, right?
Mhm.
It's like, even it's like Wilt Chamberlain, I think, I think he on his deathbed said he was notorious for, he had, um, a lot of women in his life. And
Yeah.
he's like, I had notorious, like on his deathbed, he was like, I would have rather just, had one woman opposed to millions, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like like people pursue this, and it's not even that they're ill-intended. It's like what people are ultimately pursuing is the ease of suffering, and suffering is created from the pressure in our own system of all of the emotions and beliefs and memories that we've stored, right?
Mhm.
And when you store a memory, you store it emotionally in the body. So thoughts and memories and even ideas about the future and past are not actually they're not actually the problem because it's the emotion that we don't want to feel in conjunction with it.
Right.
So like healing a traumatic event, for instance, what people do sometimes is they talk about it
Mhm.
and then it brings up the emotion and they re-traumatize themselves again and again and
Right.
again because
Yeah.
then they resist the emotion. How you heal from that is you release the emotion attached to the event,
Right.
right? And then the event is just an event that's then recategorized completely differently,
Yeah,
right?
that's why I like EMDR, and that's like the therapy I've
Mm-hmm.
done because it with trauma related
Yeah.
PTSD, and it just desensitizes you. So now the thing that I went to therapy for. What else? Like now I'm not as sensitive to it as
Right.
I once was. It's not, but I also will, like, once I see it, I don't react or respond. I just walk away from it. So I don't know if that's healthy or not, but I just,
Well,
it's a
again, I
different
think it's,
response.
I think you have to like give yourself, like you're doing, that there's a path for each person, right?
Mhm.
And there's layers that we can address something in, right? And at the end of the day, I don't know that it's necessarily about everyone becoming enlightened,
Right.
right? It's kind of like if you can function well and do your like what you do, and you avoid a certain street in your community because that's where a traffic accident happened, and you
Right.
just don't go on that street. It's like, okay, is that really impacting the person's life? Well, no. You know what I mean? Like I don't know that that person needs to go and confront that, and maybe they will find it within themselves that feel that that's what they need to do at some point. But I don't. I tend to know, like, I believe that healing. I've come to the belief now that healing is a very natural default path, and what happens is our triggers will present themselves to us because we inherently want to heal,
Hmm.
right? And so things will come into our life, whether divinely orchestrated or subconsciously orchestrated, to bring up our garbage that we don't
Hmm.
want to confront
Yeah.
and give us the ability to release it,
Right.
or give us the opportunity, I should say. And what, like I said, what most people do, what industries are built upon is making sure you don't do that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I mean, I see in marketing that there's a lot of fear based. I mean, even as a marketing tactic, like sign up by midnight and get the 50% off. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of like a sense of urgency that creates a fear and then creates FOMO. And,
Yeah.
and it's part of our everyday society, like that we don't like, and it happens so often, like thousands and thousands of times a day, probably that we don't even recognize it.
And that will work with people that are unconsciously driven by fear.
Right.
And they'll think they're making a smart decision, right? And it's not necessarily that it's a dumb decision. It's just a reflection of where they are. That's
Mhm.
why like those marketing tactics will work on a large majority of the population, because a large majority of the population is completely unaware of what state they're in, what's driving them, why they're doing what they're doing. They're just reacting,
Right.
right? And so, but someone who like, for a tactic like that would never that wouldn't work on someone who lives in a higher plane of existence, because they don't make decisions like that.
Right.
And I shouldn't say like, I don't want to say like higher in the sense of better or worse, by the way.
Right.
It's really like they just have access to more energy, and they're in states that are like peaceful or like accepting or more neutral even. That tactic is not going to work on a person because it's not going to invoke that emotion,
Right.
right? It's going to be like they're going to more buy based off like, does this feel in alignment with me?
Right.
Right? They're going to be like, yeah, this feels good to me. I want this. Right.
Yeah.
And they're not going to make it. And this is why what recovery is about. And when I say recovery, getting out of that state of fear, it's about understanding that the reason I'm in this state is a culmination of these identities that I'm holding, the way I view the world, my automatic belief systems, what I do with emotion. And this is culminated to create this. That was like I have to say, one of the big like turning points of my own healing was like, it wasn't that this thing happened to me,
Right.
right? It was like if I created this loop, you know what? I can decreate it.
Hmm.
Right? It's the same kind of thing when you say it's a decision. The first decision you have to come to the realization of is like the same way with the guy with the weight loss I was talking about. It's like the first way someone decides to lose weight is they first decide, and they admit to themselves, like, I created this as it is right now.
Right.
I take full ownership of it. Right. And that means that because I created this, I can create what I want though.
Yeah.
Right. Moving forward. And then I can change it. And that's why like I very much believe in taking ownership and responsibility. And that's uncomfortable. Most again, like the reason that most people don't want to do that is because they would much rather displace responsibility outside of themselves.
Right.
You don't understand. I don't have money because, and whatever they say because about is what
Right.
they've displaced it onto.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's easier for us to it's easier to blame an outside thing than say,
Absolutely.
because I know, like for me and my money journey, where I went through some serious financial struggles at one time, I knew I blame, oh, the economy, or oh, this happened, or oh, that happened. But I had to realize what got me to that point. And sure, there were some things that were beyond my control, but I still made a lot of really bad decisions.
Hmm.
And when I started really owning that and then going, okay, well, I created this. How do I recreate a whole different experience
Right.
around money? And that came with changing my attitude, changing my belief system, letting go of fears and making
Yes.
it, and all that. So I think, but that ownership, because it was easier at the time for me to blame
Right.
other,
Because you never have to look within.
right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's the majority of why. So is that's the main problem that most people have is instead of taking ownership, I'm going to put outside of me and I'm going to try to change that.
Right.
Right. Because at the end of the day, though, what we're most everyone is pursuing is the elimination of suffering in their life. Right. Or
Mhm.
they want to pursue, which is another way of saying eliminating what they believe is blocking their peace, love, and joy, like that inner experience that we all, I think, want and pursue in life.
Yeah.
Right. And fear is one of the most, you know, and that's why I would consider myself a student of fear and a student of consciousness. Like that's like
Mhm.
when people ask, like, what do you do? It's like, it's not really a sexy thing to say, but like, I just like, I'm like, oh, I'm like a student of consciousness. I
Oh, I
just,
think it is. I'd be like, whoa, really?
I can't get enough of it because I'm just like, you, as you work in yourself in layers, you just realize like how much is there,
Yeah.
right? And how your consciousness can be very high in one aspect of your life, but very low in another aspect of your life.
Hmm.
Like you can be like, hey, there's people that do great when it comes to relationships and romantic, and then terrible with money or
Right.
health, and then terrible with, pursuing, their work or whatever it is, right?
Right.
And you start to see once you start to see certain areas of your life that you excel at, you start to say like, how do I think in that area? Like, how do I operate? What are my convictions? What are my assumptions about it? Right.
Right.
And you start to say, well, I can apply that to this aspect of my life. And
Mhm.
that's where fear itself, was such a driving force of my life for such a long time that like I had to kind of, and it's not like I don't feel fear anymore, by the way.
Right.
Okay. But I have become a different version of myself that has the capacity to confront fear if it shows up.
Right.
Right. And more importantly, not get stuck in it. And I have the skill sets and strategies and tools, and I understand the process well enough where that's now what I teach people how to do.
So speaking of, you teach the AAA response.
Uh-huh.
So,
That's a one of the foundational tools. Yeah.
okay. So can you walk us through that?
Yeah, sure. So the AAA response was created out of a pretty, again, I don't try to make things very complex, right?
Yeah.
Um, AAA response was like a solution to a question of like, how do you engage in no compulsions? Because
Right.
part of the problem of fear is every behavior you do that reinforces the fear continues the loop.
Hmm.
So the way that someone overcomes a fear is they have to engage in no behaviors physically or mentally that's perpetuating the loop.
Right.
So most people engage in these mental behaviors, analyzing, ruminating,
Hmm.
right? Thought blocking, like, trying to figure out fear. Just notice that alone. What the person's doing is the fear comes up and they instantly go in their mind,
Right.
right? Oh God, I feel afraid. Let me think about this. Instead of like, here's the fear, right?
Right.
And so how do you engage in no behaviors? And this is the whole foundation of something called exposure and response prevention.
Hmm.
You expose yourself to the fear and prevent yourself from responding with a compulsion. So someone would touch a doorknob, to use our last example, and not wash, let's say,
Right.
right? But again, the problem with that is that most people engage in these mental behaviors without realizing it. So the AAA response was, okay, what do I need to do every time? instead of, again, like you said it really well. Instead of focusing on what not to do,
Mm-hmm.
like how do I focus on what to do? Right. Instead of focusing on debt, like how do I build wealth?
Right.
You know, and it was shifting the conversation altogether. So it's broken down into three A's to just keep it simple. And the A's are agree, allow, attack.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the first idea is to understand that you have this mind and you notice this mind that just chats all the time. And the
Just shut
mind,
up.
yeah, and the mind is not actually you.
Right.
And that was like a profound realization for me one day where I was
Mm-hmm.
like, because I read, Eckhart Tolle early on, and then
Yeah.
like Michael Singer and the Untethered
Yeah.
Soul. And
Yeah.
oh, what an and then you're like, well, what am I then? And then you really begin to understand this idea of consciousness, right? Like I'm the awareness of all of this happening, right? Because if someone's like, well, I am my mind, then it's like, well, then why, like, when someone's like, well, my mind's saying all this stuff, my mind's bothering me a lot, like, how do you know that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who is it bothering? You know what I mean?
Right.
If you are you, if you're the mind, right?
Right.
And it's this idea that you're consciousness.
Right.
That's who you really are, and your in
Mm-hmm.
your purest form is pure consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that happens is because emotion comes up and we project it into the mind, right? And then our mind projects it onto these ideas. Instead of getting into the ideas or even the mind itself, we need to first, again, disengage from the mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the first thing we have to be able to do is we have to get out of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like when people, I believe this wholeheartedly. I think it was Richard Dotz that wrote this, but it's like when you watch someone who's really struggling with their mental health and then people are, well, they're out of their mind. I'm like, I think quite the opposite. I think they're so in their mind, they don't know anything other. Right.
Right.
My
Mm-hmm.
mind sounds like that sometimes, when you're
Right.
in, when
Yeah.
you're in a really, really tough state. Right.
Yeah.
And realizing that like I have a choice on whether or not to engage with it. So the agree and disengage is really just getting out of the conversation to begin with,
Right.
getting out of identifying with the mind, understanding the context that the mind exists within the context, right, of consciousness, right? It's something that exists within consciousness,
Right.
right? The emotion is the next thing. And then it's about really like, how do I actually go and feel through an emotion,
Right.
right? And what that means in a truly non-resistant way. So that part is really the allowing process. And so I work with people a lot on emotional release, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, the attack part is when you understand that emotional scale, anger is above fear. Okay.
Right.
You have more energy in anger than you have in fear. And so
Mm-hmm.
getting someone to get aggressive or angry or like in an attacking mode is easier to handle fear from that energy state. You have to be able to be in a higher state of fear to be able to handle it correctly. When you're overcome with fear, you can't really do anything about it.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to get yourself into a higher state. And so that's the process, is being able to make sure that you're engaging in something every time that prevents you from getting in the loop about it.
Right.
Right. And then through that foundational tool, you're able to, again, confront more and more fear and release and release and release, which moves you into higher states as a more default state. And then from there, you can really begin to look at the belief work, identity work,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the real pillars that have built this all together.
Yeah. And you just answered my next question, because it was like, how is this more effective and sustainable than like traditional mindset tricks? So it's like, oh, just say a bunch of affirmations or, stuff like that. So you kind of
Well, so
answer.
so affirmation work, right? So again, everything has its place. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is where people are, again, all of these tools, right, exist to help people, again, ascend and, get out of suffering, right?
Right.
So this is where a lot of people, I think, misunderstand Eckhart Tolle's work, right?
Mm-hmm.
When he talks about the power of now. So what people do is they just try to focus on now to get rid of escape their emotion, right?
Right.
Not realizing that, no, like right now I'm feeling this,
Right.
right? Like, I'm not going to project it. Like, how long am I going to feel this? Oh my God. Like, that's usually this is people main resistance questions, right? It's like you tell them to feel their anxiety. Well, how long do I have to do that?
Right.
I'm not talking about the future, right? I'm talking
Right.
like right now, right?
Right.
Where do you feel this? And and somatically, like really like connecting with it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so when people try to use mindfulness, they're like, okay, I'm just going to be really mindful, and they use these tools with the outside of how they're intended,
Right.
right? It's not that they're not trying. Most people are actually trying way too hard to help themselves,
Right.
and they're using things out of the wrong in the wrong context. And that's oftentimes why they feel like they're not having the success or the things that they want. So, to go into your question, like affirmations, like, do I believe that people can use affirmations successfully? Yes. But I don't think how most people use them is correct or effective,
Hmm.
right? I believe that you need to be in a neutral state to affirm, like if you're trying to use affirmations to counter intrusive thoughts that are coming in,
Hmm.
or like if you're just like, hey, I'm feeling depressed right now, and it's like, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you're denying what really is. This is
Yeah.
why I think the healthiest, most balanced approach, this is why I particularly was attracted to Lester Levinson's story, and then
Hmm.
like Hawkins, and then Frederick Dotson, probably the most modern person who writes on this stuff. And I just I love their work because they I think have it correct in the sense of there's this balance of you need to be able to confront your lower emotion.
Hmm.
You cannot just deny the existence of it,
Right.
right? And you cannot just bypass it, right?
Hmm.
So I think a lot of people use affirmations to emotionally bypass and therefore repress. And
Right.
the thing is, your tank knows what's up. Like you can,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like you can see repression on people's faces left and right, where they're like, I've never been angry in my life, right? And they're
Yeah.
smiling, and you're like,
Yeah.
this doesn't feel right, right? And
Yeah.
and this is, but I think you have to learn how to address the lower emotions that are
Hmm.
already there,
Yeah.
and bypassing it and doing these other techniques that people will suggest. But again, to your point though, you also don't want to fester in it and just be like, oh, I'm depressed and this is why I'm depressed and everyone feel bad for me and this, that, and the other, right? You
Hmm.
really need that path of like, okay, I'm going to go through this and transcend it,
Right.
right? And so, yeah, because I think that all the tools that people have taught, whatever it is, they all have a certain use case in the right context.
Right.
But a lot of times people are taking, this is the same problem with like people that debate the Bible, right? Is a great
Right.
example. It's like
Yeah.
you have a consciousness level of an individual and you have another consciousness level of an individual, and they'll read the same thing and have two totally different experiences,
Yeah.
right? And then
Hmm.
they try to debate which one's true.
Right.
It's the same thing with weed, actually, and marijuana.
Hmm.
You have people who are in lower emotion. This is interesting, and I learned this from Fred, right? In his book. It like resolved the whole marijuana discussion for me in
Right.
like one, because I used to do like drug intervention stuff
Right.
with high schools, right? And we'd have like these discussions. And once I understood this idea of levels of consciousness, you start to understand that you're never really having the same conversation as an individual, right?
Right.
You're having your consciousness and their consciousness, and if you're on different planes, you're not really seeing the same thing. So
Right.
marijuana is a great example. Is like people in low states of energy, right? Fear and all this stuff, they will use marijuana and actually feel like uplifted because it
Hmm.
takes away the pain they're experiencing.
Right.
Someone who's in a higher state will smoke it and drop down,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And they'll both have these experiences, and then they'll argue with each other about what it does.
Yeah.
But it's like it's or why it's effective or not.
Right.
And it really comes back down to the overall state of the individual,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
this is in affirmation specifically, like, is there an absolute use case for them? Sure, but I think a lot of people use them in a very bypassing kind of way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of you see like mindset coaches coming out of the woodwork every day now, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, with
Post on Instagram.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, here's my daily affirmation, but it's for me. I'm like, and I do affirmations, but I only do them if I feel aligned with the
Hmm.
affirmation.
Right.
Like, I can't force it. Like you said, like I'm super angry and depressed, but I'm going to be like, I am happy. I am happy. I am
Right.
happy. Like fake it till you make it. Like it does.
Right.
It
Yeah.
doesn't
I
work.
don't, I don't think that that's because again, what is that? That's inauthentic. You
Hmm.
know, it's like instead of, hey, how do I really feel today?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If I like, it's so much healthier because it's not like I don't want people to get the idea that I'm just joyful Mr. Rogers all day, right? You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
not. I hope I'm not presenting that because it's
Yeah.
just not real. It's like, man, I haven't slept in past I think 5:45 in a year. Now with our son.
Yeah.
It's just like he's. I'm like I don't even know the last time I got a really like so waking up at 5:45 to crying again. You're just like,
You're like, this sucks.
yeah.
Okay.
It's like I'm not gonna like. Okay, wait. Now, but again, on that note, like I can focus on like the blessing of having a son and I can
Hmm.
I can choose to continue focusing on something, but like to just deny the existence of feelings is silly. And more importantly, it's not healthy, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where books like When the Body Says No
Hmm.
do such an amazing job of like showing the importance of acknowledging and working through our lower emotions, right? So
Right.
if I'm feeling, let's say I wake up and I'm just not feeling work that day,
Hmm.
right? For whatever reason, right? Instead of me like, no, you know what, Matt, just I'm so excited and I feel great and I'm gonna go in and do instead of that, like, okay, like what do you really feel right now? You know? Like,
Hmm.
hey, like take a second, like where do you feel this in your body?
Yeah.
What are you actually feeling? What story is going on underneath that, right? And actually like working with yourself as you are. And instead of I'm going to change myself to how I think I should be, it's like this is what like self-acceptance really is, in my
Hmm.
opinion. It's not that like I'm just amazing. I actually am working with myself as I am,
Right.
you know? And I'm like allowing myself to be as I am. And by doing that, I can shift through things. I can transcend things. But I have to actually first say, like, hey, this is really how I feel.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And,
And
and
it's
with
okay to
fear,
feel bad because I think that, oh, just be happy or just be positive. And, you see people on social media and they're always posting, oh, this is on our trip and this is my happy life. But they're kind of miserable in the background. So,
no, right. Well,
so
but social media has been a great outlet of projection for people, right?
yeah. I mean,
Like
when
I
I
don't even
wake up,
have social media, right?
yeah.
Like we have one for the company, but like, and I will oversee what we're going to be putting out and I create like content, right?
Right.
Videos and podcasts, but like on my phone, there's no social media.
No, you're smart.
Because again, you'll pull it up and your narrative will start.
Right.
If you watch, yeah, you'll see someone, oh man, I wish I was in Greece instead of changing diapers right now. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
but it's like, and it's not that social media, I don't think is the cause of mental illness as much as people promote that idea. I think that it's an escape, right?
Yeah.
And I think people are they crave to escape themselves so much, right? That because they don't have any way of handling what's going on in here. They don't know what
Right.
to do. So
Yeah.
escape is the obvious next step.
Yeah.
And the projection of like in social media 100%, I think that the more someone's projecting a certain image on social media, the more you can almost be certain that that's not what's going on, like
Yeah.
outside of that.
Mhm.
um because it's like people that really enjoy their lives, they don't really need to post it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they don't really go and like, you know what, before I eat this meal I need to show everyone that I'm going to eat it. You
Right.
know? It's like they just they just don't do that. And I've had the pleasure and privilege of really connecting with people who have done a lot of inner work and learning from them. And the more I do my own work on myself, the more I find myself distancing from like any kind of idea of like needing to share and tell people. It's like I just enjoy it personally. Like
Right.
if I'm going to go to a dinner, it's like number one thing is like phones are away.
Yeah.
It's like I'm just going to be here,
Right.
talking with whoever I'm with and so on and so forth.
So, what is one small practice that someone can start today to break their loop, start getting some awareness, and learn to kind of sit more with their emotions rather than fight them or avoid them?
Yeah, no, great question. It's funny because like flashback to 2 years ago, I would have been, oh, here's what you need to do, technique.
Yeah.
But and then start like, here's exactly how you. And again, I think I told you this, but I'm happy to give you a link where people can get a
Oh
free
yeah,
copy.
yeah. We'll do
Yeah.
that
So
after.
so if you're wanting to learn more about AAA response and stuff like that, I'm happy. I'm going to give um, a link to Kelly where people will be able to get it for free and download a copy with the audiobook. Just so you guys don't feel I don't feel like I'm shortchanging you here.
Yeah.
But like because I'm not trying to create that like idea that I'm withholding here. But this, as simple as this sounds, I think this is one of the more transformational things you can do in your life. And it's just asking yourself, like, why am I doing what I'm doing?
Right.
Or like, why? So if I'm like, I need to make $1 million this year. Okay. Instead of just like, see, that's a good goal, Matt. See, people agree online. Let me get a bunch of people in my life that validate that.
Yeah.
Right. Let me get into a mastermind where everyone wants to do that. And now it's like, why?
Mm-hmm.
Why, Matt? Like what drives that? You
Mm-hmm.
know? Well, you gotta understand you need, okay, yeah. But it's like, why? And if
Mm-hmm.
because most of us, like we are operating from like things that happened in junior high and high school and
Mm-hmm.
young parts of our life, and we're doing these things to prove, like, because like I was talking to someone, why I want to start a family, and and I was like, well, how come? And because they were kind of surprised when I asked,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, because like I had such this experience that I don't want that to happen. I'm like, you can't create from that place. You can't
Right.
create lovingly from that. Like you were saying, same thing where it's like, hey, I want to start a company. Why? Well, I need to show the people that rejected me when I was in sixth grade that I became something. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
like, but this is really where a lot of us operate from. And this is why if you just take the time and this is what I do in my own life, right? If I'm setting an intention, right? Because I write down my intentions, right? For the week or the month or what have you. And it's like even this like desirous need. If I have a real strong desirous need, like why do I want that? What do I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's going to do for me, right? Like really, and if you really ask yourself these questions, you're going to find that there's an emotion that drives it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's like when you this is why most manifestation work, like real good manifestation teachers, right? I mean, it sounds like you're into that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, no, and I mean, and I
Yeah.
absolutely believe in it, but I think that there's a lot of people that misteach. And so when you're referencing like all the works you're referencing, it's so important to have a diverse perspective on that stuff because there's the nonsense on YouTube and social media that's just like, well, you're just going to think about it in 3 days, you'll have $6 million. And it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
manifestation work at its real core is deep inner work
Mm-hmm.
because you realize what manifestation really is about becoming the person that's okay if that physical reality doesn't happen.
Right.
Because now when you're in a state of like whether it happens or not, because you are emotionally okay with it, whether you have it or not, that's what allows it to come into your life, right?
Right.
With ease. And this is where learning to confront and release lower emotion, learning to change belief, learning to change your state, all of this stuff. That's actually paradoxically what makes a good life. It's not changing the outside world.
Right.
Right. And when you are in higher states, you can handle, like last year in my life was probably one of the more challenging externally experiences in life that I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
for a variety of reasons, right? I had a lot of stuff happening externally, but I navigated that like like a younger version of me would have been overwhelmed and succumbed by that, right?
Mhm.
But the fact that I was able to go through each experience, like reflected to myself, like, oh wow, like the who how far I've come from where I was,
Right.
right? And because I was conscious through most of it, right? And like, you know what I mean? Like I was able to actually be aware of like what was going on. And this is why if you can simply become aware of like why you want to do what you want to do
Hmm.
or what's driving you, that's when you can begin to work from here because you actually understand that it comes from here. You don't just make the assumption that I'm doing things out of like I'm right and I'm doing this because it's the best thing and so on and so forth. A lot of people, they want to get in relationships because they want to fill this inner void of not feeling worthy.
Right.
Well, the unfairness of that is you put that on your spouse to always make you feel worthy because you don't. And then therefore you become parasitic in the relationship,
Right.
right? Or a lot of people want money, simply for just when you really talk to them and really go down the rabbit hole with it for silly reasons
Yeah.
to impress my ex that left me so that she finally realizes she made a mistake.
Yeah.
Like, what? Like,
Right.
that's why you want it?
Right.
That's why you want to go through creating a company, not to like bring something to the world.
Right.
It's
Well, it's very surface level, and that's kind of. But once you in there's Dean Graziosi does a 7 layers deep exercise,
yeah, I know. And I know
which
that should come out. Yeah.
so yeah, and it's like you start with the surface level why, but then you keep going deeper and deeper, and then you finally get to the real why, and it's not because your ex-girlfriend left you, you want to show her how great you are and make her regret
Mhm.
it. There's something way deeper
Yeah.
that you feel you need to do that, because if you're already super confident and comfortable in yourself, let her go and move on.
Yeah. Right. And this comes back down to like, generally, like we have a similar exercise when it comes to addressing fear. Most people, what they think they're afraid of and what they're really afraid of are very different things,
Yeah.
you know? And when you understand that, like, most of us, if we're dealing with a lot of fear, we're walking around with this narrative of like, the world is happening to me. I cannot trust the world.
Right.
And when I really believe that we live in a very providing universe,
Hmm.
like, and I did not see it this way all the time. I wanted to
Yeah.
be first to acknowledge, but like when I think about simple things, like I look outside my office and it's like I see trees and I realize that like every breath that I've ever needed, all the stuff that I ever need for that to happen is already given to me. I
Hmm.
don't need to justify it. I don't need to plead for it. I don't need to like, I don't need to intend for it. It's like it was already given to me.
Right.
It's already here for me, right? Like every breath, and I need to take breaths all the time, is
Right.
just provided,
Right.
right? And sustained. It's like that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, so I really transcending fear, which is obviously I know the topic of our discussion today. There's so many layers to it, right? And
Hmm.
I think part of it is the the beliefs, identities, all of that stuff, right? But like it really comes back down to like our underlying narrative of like what we think about life,
Right.
you know? And that comes back down to a lot of times early on experiences in our life. And it doesn't mean that we go and blame our parents or anything like that. What it means is that belief that I carried served me and now it no longer serves me. And so what I have the ability to do is change that, right?
Right.
And if my, you know, and this is where, yeah, I just think the simplest technique for change is beginning to become aware of yourself
Hmm.
and what drives you and really taking ownership and responsibility for that.
Yeah.
And to say, look, I actually have the ability to like work and change that.
Right.
Because if you come at things from higher energy, and this is the thing, is most people they think they're high energy people, but they're not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Most people have a complete misperception of where they actually are.
Right.
Because if you, this is why like work, like shadow work has become popular for people. Because if you really want to like understand yourself, you understand this is a messy process.
Can you talk so real quick? And I know we got to wrap up, but when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
brought up shadow work, because it's something I've heard like that has come up a lot of times recently. So just really quick, could you kind of
Yeah.
give, and I know it's
So,
a broader
so
topic,
shadow
but
work is rooted in Carl Jung, right? And who was a famous psychotherapist. Jung had a lot of brilliant ideas. So one of the things was, as Jung talks about the collective unconscious, and shadow
Mhm.
work is the stuff we don't like about ourselves, we put
Mhm.
down into a place, what he would call the shadow. And shadow work is simply becoming aware of it. But by becoming
Mhm.
aware of it, there's no longer a shadow. And to say, oh, like let's say that we don't want to address the idea that I could be angry, right?
Right.
Like simply put, and like to really like look at yourself, like, no, I actually feel angry about that event that
Hmm.
happened, right? And to like sit there and like actually feel anger, right?
Hmm.
It's a great example of what we would call like, and I don't. So some people go too deep into the idea of like you need to do shadow work, shadow work, shadow work. Everything has its time and place.
Right.
It's a thing where you don't want to get too married to one modality,
Right.
right? I think that's kind of the idea, and that's like what I teach, and like we use varying different tools.
Yeah.
AAA response being one of them, but the AAA response is really about just how do I break this loop.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I go apply that to everything else in my life. It's like that is for that, and then
Right.
we stack tools, and the more tools we have, the more we know what to do and when to do it and why to do it. But yeah, I
Right.
mean, the most transformational tool I think is just again, like you said, awareness.
Hmm.
It's like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And if I'm driven from a lower state and I'm perpetuating that, like really becoming aware of that and then working to change that.
Right.
And fear, by its very nature, again, is destructive. And when you understand that you can do the same things in your life from the state of love and it will produce 10 times better results. Like, again, I can give my wife flowers because I'm afraid that she'll leave me.
Yeah.
And I can give her to her because I just want her to enjoy it.
Right.
I can do the same act, but how and where I'm doing it from matters.
Right.
Right. And because that all carries an energetic signature into everything. And this is why I think when you understand fear and you really begin to confront your own fear, that is what allows you to create a completely different experience because it's not about what you're doing, it's about why you're doing it.
Right. So that would be kind of great final advice for the person who's listening, who's tried everything, but still struggles. Like, what would you want them to hear or know?
With fear specifically.
Yeah. Well, still struggles with fear and anxiety.
Yeah, yeah, fear and anxiety. I think that fear and anxiety is a normal experience as humans, right? It is a normal thing that we have the ability to experience.
Hmm.
If you pathologize it and you make it into a disease, you're going to resist it,
Hmm.
right? And when you resist, what you resist persists,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So the more you resist the idea of anxiety or deny that it's in your life, it's going to persist and grow. The paradox of breaking free from anxiety and fear and OCD and these loops is your willingness to actually confront it, right? And your willingness to confront it is your path to liberation,
Right.
right? And there are absolutely ways to do that. I mean, I obviously teach AAA response, which again I'll make sure I give you a link so people can download the book, for free and the audio book as well in conjunction with that. But yeah, I mean, like it it's a thing where like if you see yourself as a creator, right, and your life is a creation that you're a part of, and you stop seeing life as something that is happening to you, and you take responsibility for it. Wherever you are is just where you are, and then wherever you want to go is achievable. Like I really believe that.
Yeah.
And it's not like because you've dealt with something for X amount of years and you've tried this and this and this and this and this, it doesn't mean that a solution is not available. It just means that you haven't mastered it yet. That's all.
Right.
And I think one of the qualities that I have and for better and worse, is that stubborn persistence,
Yeah.
right? It's like, and I just to never give up and to keep moving forward step by step, you know what I mean? And you keep going, right? I think that's where it's like the only way you can ever really fail when it comes to recovering from OCD and anxiety or really anything in life is just if you actually stop.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I obviously am quite a believer in what I teach, and that's why I want to share it and wanted to come on today and share a bit about it. And, so obviously that I think would be a great next step for
Yeah.
anyone that's really struggling with it.
Well, thank you. I felt like I got a whole therapy session here. It was very, and I feel like a lot of things that you said are things that have really resonated with me, but I think a lot of people need to hear it because I think people just feel fear. They don't realize they feel fear. They don't know what to do with it when they do. So I hope, whoever is listening to this episode got a lot out of it, that they share it with someone, because I think a lot of people could definitely use every bit of information that you poured into us today. And I am so grateful for all that. So where can people learn about
I
you,
think
your book, From Stuck to Unstuck?
sure.
You've got a promo code.
So, yeah, so what we'll do is, so my website's restoredminds.com, right? Anyone that wants to connect with me, you can email me at matt@restoredminds.com if you felt aligned with that. We also have a podcast, so the OCD and Anxiety Show is the podcast, or I'm sorry, it's Breaking Free from OCD and Anxiety. We updated the name, and that can be on the main platforms. But yeah, I mean the what we want to do for everyone listening is we want to give the book. So the book's available on Amazon and Audible and all that. But we'll have a special link that we give to you, and it will just have the promo code embedded in it, right?
Okay.
So if they just click on it, it'll be taken to a page, and you'll be able to download a PDF version as well as the audiobook. And we have a special 5-day training that we did with it, and that's all going to be free.
Oh,
And
nice.
so we'll give that to you and whoever wants. Whoever wants it, yeah, by all means, they're welcome to go through yeah, you can, I imagine you can probably link it below. Is that
Yeah, I'll
right?
do it in the show notes.
Perfect. Yeah.
So
And so I'll send you that, and then they can they can access it through that.
perfect. Well, Matt Cotty, thank you so much for being here. This is, like I said, it felt like it was a therapy session for
Yeah, yeah.
me and so many others. And I really appreciate your time and your insight and just all the incredible information and value you poured into us today. And I really, really thank you for that.
No, thank you, Kelly. I really appreciate you having me today.
Yeah.
I've had an amazing time talking with you, and yeah, I hope this benefits everyone that's listening in some way.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much again for tuning in. And because you stayed until the end, you will get a free copy of Matt's book, From Stuck to Unstuck, in the audio version. And I believe there's a downloadable version. So the link is below in the show notes with the coupon code or the promo code. So thank you again for being here. And again, please subscribe, because when you subscribe, it helps me reach more people. And the thing is, more people need to hear messages of hope and healing. And that is my goal here with the Confidence Academy, to help people heal, to feel better and live happier, more productive, safer, and more confident lives. So please subscribe. Please share this with someone who you think needs to hear it. Next week, I am talking to two incredibly intuitive women. They're intuitive healers, and we're going to demystify those ailments, those illnesses, those health problems that the doctors can't quite figure out, no matter how many tests they run. So you're not going to want to miss that episode. And thank you again for being here. And I will see you next time, my friends.